Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. Recently on this channel we have been covering the history of various characters who exist within the Street Fighter universe, and as chosen by this channel's Patreon backers, today we shall be taking an in-depth look at the career of the Red Cyclone himself and national Russian hero, the man they call Zangief. The huge in stature professional wrestler has been a hit with fighting game fans ever since his first appearance in Street Fighter 2, and since that debut in gaming 30 years ago, Zangief's legacy has grown and grown, resulting in him easily becoming one of the most recognisable characters in the versus fighting paradigm. Within this content we are going to go back and look at every single time he has shown up in video games over the years, and even look at some of his appearances in other forms of media. So join me as we take a peek behind the literal Iron Curtain as we explore this man's roots and where they have led to in present day. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mighty story of Zangief. Yeah! As Street Fighter fever began to sweep the world in 1991, every single character who appeared in the legendary Street Fighter 2 was memorable, with each fighter being easily distinguishable from the next. Zangief was no different, with this 7-foot tall, 400-pound hulk of a specimen captivating audiences with both his look and style. This huge warrior looked for business with his massive frame, unique formation of chest hair, beard and mohawk. Zangief was the epitome of masculinity, and with a body covered almost entirely in scars, this just added to this fighter's mystique. No one can pull off bright red spandex quite as well as this man, and who is going to dare question his wardrobe choices anyway, when he could pretty much pile drive anyone into the floor. Zangief's signature close-range wrestling fighting style means he can devastate opponents, unleashing destructive throws and powerful base moves. Carrying such huge amounts of muscle mass obviously means that Zangief is slower than most fighters, but if Zangief manages to grip a fellow combatant, it is pretty much lights out for them, with moves such as the spinning pile driver giving Zangief the Red Cyclone nickname. For his original appearance in Street Fighter 2, looking at original concept art, this wrestler from the USSR was given the prototypical working name of Vodka Gabowski, making him at first sound like a character for the Punch-Out universe, rather than one for the world of Street Fighter. There is a huge possibility that the name Zangief eventually got chosen due to the fact there was a former Soviet amateur wrestler who made a name for himself in Japanese professional wrestling working for NJPW. The man known as Victor Zangief would also make appearances for UWF International and even WCW. His heavy-set physique also draws parallels with Salman Hashimov, another Soviet wrestler who would carve a niche for himself in Japan. In some ways, his design and fighting style also has parallels with existing members of Capcom's Street Fighter universe, who were around before Zangief, such as Birdie, who first appeared in the 1987 Street Fighter game, another large man with a mohawk, and of course Mike Hagar from Final Fight, another beefy wrestler who shares many of the same moves, such as the spinning clothesline for example. As for Zangief's character, in Street Fighter 2 and many subsequent games, he is billed from his home country of the USSR, although it is of note that the Soviet Union would dissolve the very same year that Street Fighter 2 saw release. Zangief's almost godlike physique was in some ways typical of many athletes who hailed from the region. The Union would regularly offer state-funded athletic programs that would utilise and encourage the use of bodybuilding steroids, which would aid them in crushing the competition around the world in sports such as weightlifting for many years. Zangief is said to have been part of one of these athletic programs, being handpicked for his skill by the last leader of the USSR, Mikhail Gorbachev himself. His connections to Gorbachev would be how Zangief would land a spot in the Second World Warrior Tournament, being given the opportunity to represent his country's might on the world stage. Being a patriotic individual, this was a huge opportunity for Zangief to show to the world that his motherland was indeed the greatest country in the world, just like he believed. So the fearless and competitive fighter set out to make his nation proud. Zangief's fate in the game is dictated by the player. It is said in the scenario where Zangief lost the tournament, he would return to the USSR dissatisfied with his shortcomings, returning to wrestling bears in the Russian wilderness. The very activity that led to the scars that cover his body, which we mentioned briefly at the beginning. If defeating M. Bison playing as Zangief, it leads to one of the most memorable endings which can be found within Street Fighter 2. Hilariously, Gorbachev is lowered from his helicopter to congratulate and shake hands with the Red Cyclone, offering the simple words, "Comrade Zangief, You have made your country proud and shown the Soviet spirit can overcome all obstacles. Now it's time to celebrate in the appropriate Russian fashion. Russian music then begins to blare out as Zangief, Gorbachev and his guards perform a Cossack dance in celebration, leading to the most jovial ending Street Fighter 2 has to offer by far. After the massive success of Street Fighter 2, we would of course get the infamous live-action movie where Zangief, played by Andrew Bryanarski, was depicted as a villain fighting on the same side as Shadowfall, which as we know is completely different to any of the games. One imagines that this was due to the fact that the movie was made for an American audience, and according to US logic, anyone Russian in a film or television show has to be one of the baddies. This same version of Zangief would of course show up in the Street Fighter the movie video games. Zangief in the movie is reduced to a comic relief villain serving as little more than Bison's lackey. Throughout the movie he is depicted as an utter meat-headed moron, but at least in the movie the character leaves Shadowfall after DJ explained to him that Bison was actually the bad guy. As mentioned in my Blanka video previously, Blanka and Zangief would fight in a brief scene in the Japanese Street Fighter 2 animated movie, where the pair would fight in an evening of entertainment for crime bosses, with Zangief becoming fodder yet again, with Blanka comically electrocuting him. In the Street Fighter 2 V animated TV show, like the live action movie, Zangief is depicted again as working for M. Bison's Shadowfall, where he gets into various combat encounters with the heroes of the show. He is basically a minor villain on the program. The American Street Fighter canon would depict Zangief in much of the same way. But to date, Street Fighter 2 V is the only Japanese produced content where Zangief would be represented as a bad guy. The Street Fighter Alpha game set prior to the events of Street Fighter 2 would shed more on Zangief's backstory for all of us, skipping the first Alpha game out but showing up in Alpha 2. The game would outlay that Zangief is travelling the world on behalf of the USSR's president, who wants him to show off to the world the Soviet Union's might, and even improve the bloc's international image, something that Gorbachev strove to do in the real world as well. As president, Gorbachev sought to build ties with Western European countries, such as the United Kingdom and France. He would also meet with the US president ending the Cold War, and gave the okay for reuniting Germany post-World War II. On top of all of this, he tolerated the brilliant fall of tyrannical Marxist-Leninist administrations throughout Eastern and Central Europe, and would curtail human rights abuses in the Soviet Union. In many ways, this recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize was one of the most significant figures of the 20th century. And I guess in Street Fighter's lore, Zangief was a pawn in helping to build such bridges for Russia moving into the 90s, even if Vladimir Putin would go on to burn most of these bridges down. Anyway, as for Alpha 2, during Zangief's world tour, he encounters Birdie for the first time, resulting in a matchup between the two Mohawk sporting Leviathans, then later Ken Masters. Defeating Ken, Gorbachev congratulates his comrade, with him next being sent to a remote location in Siberia to train further. In Alpha 3, Gorbachev calls Zangief into action once again, this time being sent on a mission to combat Shadowfall, an organisation whose corruption has even spread as far as Russia. During this adventure, Zangief befriends new allies such as sumo wrestler E. Honda and fellow professional wrestler R. Mika, a young lady who considers Zangief her idol, and a man that inspired her whole career. Zangief reaches a point where he is on the verge of destroying M. Bison's Psycho Drive, however Blanka inadvertently stops him from doing so. Different characters' endings in the game deliver different results. In Zangief's own ending he teams with E. Honda and the two men destroy the drive, but in R. Mika's ending she follows Zangief and watches him destroy the Psycho Drive, with Zangief also protecting her from Shadowfall's base that is falling apart. In all scenarios, Zangief returns to Russia satisfied, of course later going on to represent his country in the Second World Warrior Tournament, which we have already covered. The next part of Zangief's Street Fighter story following Street Fighter 2 would occur in Street Fighter 4, with him entering the World Tournament hosted by Sin, the purpose being to prove to a younger audience that he's still got it. His involvement in Street Fighter 4 concludes with him coming to the realisation that he has not managed to find a souvenir to take back to Russia with him. He then decides to pose for a photograph holding the battered Seth in a headlock, so that admiring young fans can see him laying the smackdown on the bad guy from TV. Zangief's character was given more of a chance to shine in Street Fighter V. In fact, many people claim that they enjoyed Zangief's portrayal in this game over every other character in the whole title. Rather than being obsessed with patriotism and displaying the might of the USSR, this time around Zangief is more keen to simply display the amazing power of muscles, something that Zangief repeatedly reminds us of throughout the game's story. Playing as him, he is introduced winning a tournament in New York using a spinning pile driver, then flies to London to meet up with Rainbow Mika, who refers to him as Master Zangief. Zangief fights her to test her strength, but Zangief manages to defeat her, with Mika claiming she wants to be great just like him. But Zangief informs her the only way to do that is by following in his footsteps of what he refers to as muscle spirit, so proposes the two embark on a training journey together to fight people and, well, build muscle. The pair meet Azam in China, an advisor for the so-called Muscle Soul Fighters Club. Here the two meet Rashid, who is impressed with Zangief's muscles, so Zangief comically challenges Rashid to demonstrate the power of them further. Impressed also, Azam states that Zangief inherited his spirit from his ancestors, and this fuels his power as a fighter, and this turns into muscle. Eventually, Mika ends up tag team partners with Zangief on shows, with Zangief encouraging her not to get so antsy, as her muscle spirit is ready for anything. In Shadowfall, Zangief's first appearance takes place with him and Mika facing off against Alex of Street Fighter 3 fame in a handicap match. But Laura turns up and says, "Now hold on a minute players, this is going to be a tag team match, holla holla holla." Eventually, they join up with other fighters in an effort to disable the Black Moons in the game, M. Bison's super weapon. Zangief is featured in some fantastically hilarious fight scenes throughout, such as a scene where he deflects Balrog's punches just through the power of his large chest muscles. In fact, he even manages to break a samurai sword using his muscle too. Muscle really is the ultimate source of power after all. While it would be tough to argue a case for Zangief being one of the more important characters in Street Fighter V's story, at the very least his appearances are extremely memorable. Of course, outside of these mainline games, Zangief would make countless other video game appearances as well, including being included in every entry of the polygonal Street Fighter EX series created by Eureka. The EX canon basically follows off where Street Fighter 2 ends, and Zangief is present once again in these games to fight in tournaments to make the USSR proud. In these games, he comes across an opponent from India who is closer to matching Zangief's power and muscle out of anyone he has ever encountered, with the Indian wrestler known as Darun being stiff competition. Due to their respect for one another, the two men become a team in Street Fighter EX3, with the third tournament being participated in under tag team rules players. In the Marvel vs Capcom series, Zangief was made playable in every entry from X-Men vs Street Fighter right up until Marvel vs Capcom 2, all of which utilise his Street Fighter Alpha series sprite. Less Street Fighter characters are included in the latter two Marvel vs Capcom games, with the wrestler spot instead being given to Final Fight's Hagar. As stated last video, it is criminal that Hagar has never been made playable in any Street Fighter games, but it is even more of a shame there is no game in existence where you can face off against fellow wrestler Zangief in any capacity. It is the Capcom equivalent to pro wrestling in the real world, never booking The Undertaker vs Sting, even when there was opportunities for such a bout. Speaking of wrestling, Saturday Night Slam Masters Russian fighter Biff Slamkovich mentions the USSR's legend as Comrade Zangief, however only in the English translation of the game rather than the Japanese original. Zangief would also appear playable in every single Capcom vs SNK crossover game, and in Street Fighter Cross Tekken, tagging up with Rufus. He would also be playable in Capcom Fighting Evolution, where he is shown during his ending training with bears in Siberia, miserably visualising himself going on vacation in a tropical place. With Ryu and Ken being added as playable fighters in Smash Bros Ultimate, Zangief would appear as a spirit item in the game. His spirit also opens a dojo in the title where players can send spirits for wrestling training, with other nods to the fighter placed throughout the game. In fact, Masahiro Sakurai, the creator of Super Smash Bros, would further reference the character in an interview, explaining that the wrestling fire Pokemon Incineroar's neutral special attack, the Darkest Lariat, was modelled after Zangief's similar move. In another bizarre appearance, Zangief would even appear in the Disney movie Wreck-It Ralph in the capacity as a villain. Rather than telling the truth and admit that they made Zangief a villain due to still being indoctrinated by Cold War propaganda, Disney screenwriter Phil Johnson weaseled out of directly criticising communist Russia by claiming he made Zangief a villain due to having great frustration and beating Zangief in his childhood. While this could have occurred playing Street Fighter 2 since I was the age of 6, I find Johnson's statement odd, as for me, Zangief is one of the less frustrating opponents compared to many of the others. Why is it so hard for these people to admit they made Zangief a baddie purely for being Russian? I bloody hate Walt Disney. From my understanding, a piece of Street Fighter media has never been created by Americans that has placed Zangief as a good guy, which is the polar opposite to the portrayal of the character in all video games. It is all very interesting how Zangief is represented so differently across different countries and in different forms of media. Speaking of changes over time, in the newest remake of Street Fighter 2, known as Ultra Street Fighter 2, the story of the game has been retconned, removing the USSR from the game altogether in favour of Russia. This means that Gorbachev was also cut from the Street Fighter 2 story, instead featuring an ending sequence showing Zangief going back to bear wrestling in Siberia, with the wrestling promoter signing him up so he can personally show the might of Mother Russia, so at least Zangief's patriotic side remained intact. I guess in many ways, with the Zangief flipping between a hero and a villain between different media forms, at least I guess this is faithful to pro wrestling itself, as pro wrestling characters often switch between being goodies and baddies throughout their ring careers. So I guess there are certainly worse choices when it comes to writing a character inconsistently. And pro wrestling is consistently inconsistent after all. So whether Zangief is a goodie or a baddie, from Russia or the Soviet Union, a nationalist patriot or a muscle-obsessed lunatic, he is still the pile-driving maniac we all know and love. And that, my friends, deserves celebrating. So ladies and gentlemen, that was the mighty story of Zangief. Let me know down below which Street Fighter character you would like me to cover on here next. I may even add your character suggestions names to my next Patreon voting ballot, so the channel Patreon backers can choose the next installment in this series. You can also really help me out by subscribing to my new wrestling channel, where I've already uploaded 7 biopic style videos over there. Please check out my pinned comment to this video if you want to see the exciting new show I have on offer over on Top Hat Wrestling Man. Please give it a chance. You do not even need to watch wrestling to appreciate these characters' absurdities. I'm also on Twitch most Fridays, Saturdays and Tuesday nights, if anyone wants to come say hello to me there. I would finally like to quickly add Patreon is such an important part of what I do, so I am forever thankful to the small group of people who help me out over there. Thank you for helping me make the best content possible and assisting in giving tens of thousands of viewers completely free entertainment. Our channel patrons are truly the greatest, so for everyone who kindly thanks me for what I do in the comment section down below, these fine people listed here also deserve your praise as well. So as usual, huge thank yous and appreciation goes out to Sebastian Velez, A Murder of Crows, Carl Johnson, Hero Paulo Lopez, Nostalgia Collector, Ben Harrod Dying, Corey Imarsh Sr., Capcom vs SNK, BXL Gotham, Rowan Dinched, Evan Balder, Philip Namph, Azur Arkai, Keith Ferguson, Dropkin Varela, Michael Cullix, Ego, Jordan Durant, Angel Art 85, Ian Boyle, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of the Ted, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Kid Anime, Justin Wang, Aaron McNamara, Hermes Gonzalez, Instant Gratification, Monkey Man Shovel, James Bishop JB, Michael Hall, Wesley Sanghi, Fellatio, Langston Miller, Noob, Brian Barry, Sarah Powell, Flaming Renee, Marvin Aaron Liga, Chris Cool, TOG Driver, Adrian Hannington, Bernard NG, Richard Stu Stewart, Dan Van Dammit, Louis Viant, John Bates, David Bowl, Chris Fisk, Mike Bruno, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Greg Jenkins, Retroverse.com, Casey Wright, Since Spaces, Zai, Andrew Bazansky, Alex Summers and Gunther Hendricks. I would like to thank you all very much for what you do. Much appreciated. Cheers!